a political prisoner was imprisoned because he opposed the racism practiced by his government against the people. He decided that he would do the impossible to escape, but he was imprisoned on the second floor, making it impossible to dig a tunnel or escape through the window. There was no other way except through the door. However, his cell had two doors, an inner door and an outer door. The outer door could not even be opened from the inside because the keyhole was on the outside. Besides these two doors, there were 8 more doors he had to pass through to escape from prison, making a total of 10 doors. At this point, one would think that escaping was impossible. However, this prisoner was going to use his intelligence and create extremely innovative tools. I won't spoil what these tools are for you, but they would help him bypass all the doors and execute his escape plan. So, what are these tools, and how did he make them while inside the prison? Follow the story to find out. Our story took place in the 1970s in South Africa. For those who don't know, South Africa has suffered from colonialism throughout its history, particularly from the British and the Dutch. As a result of this colonization, South Africa became the African country with the largest number of white-skinned people of European descent. Although white people were and still are a minority in the country, there was an apartheid system against black Africans, the original inhabitants of the land. White people had their own exclusive neighborhoods, which were very clean, well-organized, and beautiful, while black people were not allowed to enter these areas. Instead, they were forced to live in poor, deteriorating neighborhoods under extremely difficult conditions. This was apartheid in a nutshell, a system that lasted in South Africa from 1948 to the early 1990s. The South African people, particularly the black Africans, resisted, fought, and struggled to end this system. The most significant symbol of this resistance was Nelson Mandela, who took up arms and fought against apartheid with force. As a result, he was imprisoned for 27 years, but he later became the first black president of South Africa when they finally ended apartheid. For this reason, South Africa is one of the biggest supporters of Palestine because they have suffered and understand the history of occupation and apartheid. They also know that such oppression does not end without resistance. However, even though apartheid in South Africa benefited white people, some honorable white individuals rejected this system. Our story begins with 2 such individuals. The first was Tim Jenkin, and the second was Stephen Lee. Both were white South Africans and activists against apartheid. One of the things Tim Jenkin once did was carry a bomb in a bag and place it on a street. Suddenly, boom, it exploded. However, it turned out that it was actually a leaflet bomb, meaning it contained papers. These papers carried a message addressed to both white and black South Africans, urging them to resist the government and the apartheid system. Tim and Stephen were close friends and continued their resistance activities for years. But like any oppressive government, South Africa's security forces at the time had strict surveillance, intelligence, and espionage measures. Eventually, the authorities discovered their activities. Security forces raided their homes, arrested them, and in January 1978, Tim and his friend Stephen were sent to prison. They were placed in Pretoria Prison, which was considered one of the most secure prisons in South Africa. It was classified as maximum security, meaning it was heavily guarded. The charge against them was terrorism, and they were sentenced to 12 years in prison. However, what the prison administration and guards did not know was that these 2 men were already determined to escape, even before they were sentenced in court. For them, staying in prison for such a long time was unthinkable. But this prison was tough. It had numerous security measures in place to prevent any escape attempts. The perimeter fence was a 6-meter high metal mesh. Armed guards were stationed on the rooftops at all times, and at night, dogs were released into the prison yard. Dogs trained to sniff out and chase down any prisoner attempting to escape in the blink of an eye. When the guards escorted Tim and Stephen to their cells for the first time, they noticed the sheer number of doors they had to pass through. Door after door, it felt like they would never end. Some were heavy doors, some were barred gates, and others were simple wooden doors. But with the number of doors they passed through, it felt like the prison itself was made of doors. From their early days in prison, whenever they were allowed outside for exercise or to leave their cells, they would explore every possible corner. They examined the walls, exits, and entrances, looking for any potential weaknesses. They quickly realized that escaping would be extremely difficult and complicated. Tim and Stephen were not the only political prisoners in the prison. There were 10 others, making a total of 12. They were all placed in the same section with their cells next to each other. Their section was on the second floor, which meant digging a tunnel was not an option. How could they dig from the second floor? The window was also too high to escape from, so the only way out was through the cell door. And of course, the cell door had a lock. Sitting in his cell, Tim began thinking. He stared at the lock, wondering how he could open it. He wasn't an expert in locks, but he had some prior experience. He used to play around with locks sometimes, opening them with wires. So he had a general understanding of how locks worked. He approached the lock on his cell door and started examining it closely. He imagined what it looked like from the inside, its internal components, and what the key that could open it might look like. Then an idea struck him. He took a piece of paper, placed it over the lock, and traced the lock's dimensions. He wanted to determine the size of the key he would need. Next, he took another piece of paper, folded it, inserted it into the lock along with a pen, and measured the depth of the lock. He was running experiments using paper and pens to determine the key's measurements. Keep in mind, this was 1978, and locks were not as advanced as they are today. Eventually, Tim managed to sketch a key with the dimensions he believed matched the original key. Now that he had the measurements, how could he make the key? His idea was to carve it from wood. The prisoners were assigned work in the prison's carpentry workshop, where they made various wooden objects. Tim decided to try making a wooden key. Of course, a wooden key sounded unusual and highly unlikely to work. When he shared the idea with his friend Stephen, Stephen was skeptical. He didn't believe a wooden key could possibly open a lock, even if the measurements were correct. But they had nothing to lose, so why not try? Tim began crafting the key during his work hours in the prison workshop. Of course, he had to make this key while being closely watched by the guards, so it was not an easy task at all. His friend Stephen was always trying to cover for him. After an entire week, Tim finally managed to create the key. But the next challenge was to smuggle the key out of the workshop. Prisoners were always searched when leaving, so how could he get the key out without the guards discovering it? The answer was in the coffee cup, or more precisely, the coffee container they had. Each prisoner had a cup, but even these cups were searched. The guard would pour out any remaining coffee into the sink to ensure prisoners weren't hiding anything inside. However, Tim discovered that the bottom of the coffee cup could be unscrewed, revealing a small space inside. He opened the bottom, stuffed it with paper padding, and placed the key inside. The paper stuffing was to keep the key from moving, so that if the guard shook the cup, he wouldn't hear anything inside. When the prisoners lined up to leave the workshop, the guard began searching them one by one. As usual, he took their coffee cups, emptied any remaining liquid into the sink, and checked that they were empty. When it was Tim's turn, he was nervous, but he tried to remain calm and not show any signs of anxiety. He handed his cup to the guard, who opened it, poured out the coffee, and even shook the cup to make sure nothing was inside. This was where the paper padding came in handy. The guard returned the cup to Tim and let him pass. Tim walked back to his cell with the wooden key successfully smuggled in. As soon as he was back in his cell and the guards had left the area, Tim immediately began testing the key. He inserted it into the lock, excited, but his excitement quickly faded when the key did not work. The lock simply refused to open. However, Tim had anticipated this. He had expected the key not to work on the first try. The reason he chose wood was not random. When he turned the wooden key inside the lock left marks on the key, showing exactly where the key was getting stuck. Tim had a small piece of metal that he used to carefully carve out the areas where the key was getting stuck. His strategy was to reshape the key gradually so that it matched the exact shape needed for the lock. He kept carving, inserting the key, testing it, adjusting, and repeating the process until finally the lock clicked open. The wooden key worked. At that moment, Tim felt an indescribable feeling, a sense of victory, euphoria, and an overwhelming achievement. However, he knew this was just the beginning. The door he had just unlocked was only the first door of the cell. It was a barred door, but right behind it was another door, a solid, reinforced metal door that completely blocked the cell. And to make matters worse, this metal door had no lock on the inside. It could only be opened from the outside. Tim already knew this. He wasn't surprised. He had known from the start that there were 2 doors to the cell. He knew that even after unlocking the barred door, he would face the bigger challenge of the second door. But Tim always followed a step-by-step approach. Solve the problem in front of you first, then worry about the next one. There was a small window next to the door, through which a prisoner could extend their hand, but it was too far to reach the lock. Before Tim could even think about how to reach the lock, he first had to create the right key for it. His only chance to take measurements of the outer lock was on Friday cleaning day. Every Friday morning, the guards took all the prisoners out of their cells to clean the section and the hallway in front of the cells. And by the way, all the prisoners in this section were political prisoners, so they were all cooperative. They knew about Tim and Stephen's plan and helped cover for them and warned them when guards were approaching. At first, Tim tried using the same key he had made for the inner door, but it didn't work. So he repeated the same process. He took paper and a pen, measured the lock's depth, and sketched an approximate shape of the key. Then, he crafted the key in the workshop and smuggled it out the same way, inside the coffee cup. Once again, he tested the key and adjusted it using the small metal piece, just like he did with the first key, until it fit perfectly. Now remember, Tim was testing the key while the door was open because it was cleaning time and the prisoners were outside their cells. When he inserted the key, he was sure it would work. But then something went wrong. The lock got jammed. The lock's metal bolt was sticking out and wouldn't go back in. The key could go in and out easily, but it wouldn't turn. Tim kept trying, but nothing worked. Cleaning time was almost over and the guards were about to return. Tim tried everything, twisting the key, hitting the lock with his hand, but the lock wouldn't budge. Finally, the guards arrived, so he had no choice but to stop and return to his cell. The guards noticed the jammed lock, but instead of suspecting the prisoners, they blamed each other, thinking one of the guards had left it that way. They didn't suspect the prisoners at all. One of the guards simply used the original key, unlocked the jammed lock, and Ray locked it properly. Tim took a deep breath of relief because he had been terrified that they would search his cell and find the wooden keys. Luckily, things worked out in his favor this time. After this incident, Tim and Stephen decided that they would never test a lock again while the door was open. From now on, they would only test the keys when the door was closed. Now, back to the biggest problem. As I mentioned before, the outer door could only be opened from the outside. And the small window next to the door was too far for a prisoner to reach the lock. Tim and Stephen spent a long time stuck on this problem, trying to come up with a solution. Then, one day, Tim had a sudden flash of inspiration. The prison allowed prisoners to keep cleaning brooms in their cells. Tim had an innovative idea. He took a small wooden block, attached the key to it, and secured the block to the end of a broomstick using a screw. This way, he could extend the stick through the window and rotate the wooden block with the key inside the lock. It was a genius-level invention. Of course, testing this was risky because it could make noise, and the guards randomly patrolled the area. Stephen played the lookout role, keeping his eyes and ears open for any approaching guards. Tim stretched his arm through the window, holding the broomstick. He even tied the broomstick to his wrist with a small rope so that if he dropped it, he could retrieve it easily. With one hand, he extended the stick toward the lock, and with the other hand, he held a small mirror to see where the keyhole was. Since he couldn't stick his head out of the window due to the bars, he kept trying to insert the key into the lock, but the process was extremely difficult. Finally, after a long time and many attempts, he managed to get the key into the lock. He took a deep breath, relieved, and calmed his nerves, which had been extremely tense. Then he tried to turn the key, but unfortunately it didn't work. Tim pulled back the broomstick and started working on the key again with a small metal piece. The lock had left marks on the key, showing him exactly where the key was getting stuck. He carefully carved those areas to reshape the key so it would fit the lock better. He repeated this process night after night, working on the key for hours, trying to perfect it. This entire process took him 2 full months. He even had to replace the key multiple times, as the task was extremely difficult. Despite everything, he never gave up. He kept trying until, one day, the lock finally opened. The joy Tim felt in that moment was indescribable. He had never experienced such a sense of victory in his life before. It was a massive achievement. Now, they could freely leave their cells. They could unlock both doors easily. Since all the cell doors had the same type of lock, it was obvious that the same key would work for all of them. After all, they wouldn't create a unique lock for each cell. Now, they had to deal with the next door. The only time they could test this door's lock was on cleaning day, the Friday morning cleaning period. Before Tim attempted to make a new key, he first tested the keys he already had, hoping one of them might work. And here came the pleasant surprise. When he tried the first key, the one used for the inner cell door, it unlocked the section's main door. The prison had used the same lock on the section's door. Their joy was unimaginable. They had saved themselves an enormous amount of effort. Now, they could unlock their cell doors and the section door. Tim and Stephen sat down to discuss their next steps. Initially, their original plan was to escape through the prison yard. They would exit their section, then either dig a tunnel underground or climb the 6-meter-high metal fence. But Tim proposed a new idea. Why don't we leave through the door? The main door, the staff door, or any other exit leading outside. If I was able to make keys for all these doors so far, I can make keys for any other doors that block our way. Stephen thought the idea was crazy. They had no idea how many doors were in front of them or which door led outside. They didn't know the layout of the prison. To figure it out, they needed to find the exact path they had to take once they left their cells and their section. Stephen came up with a plan. He faked severe tooth pain. Since there was no dentist inside the prison, they had to take him outside to see one. If they took him out, he would be able to count the doors he passed through and memorize the exact route they needed to follow. After Stephen returned from the dentist, he had bad news for Tim. He told him that after leaving their section, he had to pass through 7 more doors. This meant they had a total of 10 doors to go through before reaching the outside. At least now, they had a clear map of the path they needed to take. At this stage, they felt that they needed an additional member on the team. Over the past months, they had befriended another prisoner who had been jailed for the same charges as them. His name was Alex Mumbaris. When they invited him to join their escape, he was immediately excited. He had always wanted to join them but didn't want to impose himself. Stephen explained the escape route they had to follow, a path filled with doors that needed unlocking. To help you visualize their plan, here is a simple diagram of the path and the doors they had to open. 1. Their cell doors, door 1 and door 2. Oh, these were the first 2 doors they had already unlocked. 2. The section's door, door 3. Oh, after leaving their cells, they had to unlock the section door. 3. The stairway leading down. Oh, since they were on the 2nd floor, they had to go down the stairs. For the main hallway door, door 4. Oh, this door was at the bottom of the stairs. 5. The corridor leading to door 5. Oh, at the end of the hallway, there was another door. Oh, before reaching door 5, they would pass the guard's main office, where the section's assigned guard was usually stationed. 6. Door 6. Oh, after passing through the hallway, there was another security door. 7. Door 7. Oh, a barred gate separating another section. 8. Door 8. Oh, another reinforced door. 9. Door 9. Oh, a small staircase leading to the final exit. 10. Door 10. The final exit. This door led directly outside the prison. This final door appeared to be a staff-only exit, probably used by guards or employees to enter and exit the prison without going through the main gate. If they could reach this door and unlock it, they would walk straight out of the prison, without having to cross the yard, face the security dogs, or deal with armed guards stationed on the rooftops. But the biggest challenge was getting through all the doors leading up to it. Keep in mind, this was a simplified diagram. The prison was far more complex. However, this diagram helped them understand their escape route clearly. At this point, they had successfully bypassed the first 3 doors. Now, they had to deal with door 4, the one they faced after descending the stairs. The advantage they had with this door was that they saw it being opened every day. This was the door that led to the workshop, the yard, and other areas of the prison. Every day, they watched the guards unlock this door, so Tim was able to observe the key's shape and size, trying to memorize its design. Since this key wasn't too different from the previous ones, he created a similar-looking key based on his observations. Now came the big problem: how would they test it? This door wasn't close to them. Leaving their cells, leaving their section, and going down the stairs just to test the key was a huge risk. To reduce the risk, they had to be extremely careful. They started observing the guards and their daily routines. One important discovery they made was that after 5 p.m., only one guard was assigned to their section. However, at night, the security dogs were released into the yard, and armed guards patrolled the rooftops. The prisoners didn't need to go into the prison yard. They only had to be cautious of the night guard, who usually stayed in the guard office. There were different guards working the night shift, But one specific guard took this shift more often than his colleagues because he preferred night duty. Luckily for the prisoners, this guard had a fixed routine that never changed. Every night, he would turn on music through the prison's internal sound system, playing it through the speakers in the cell block. He would sit in his office, relax, and listen to music, while the prisoners listened along. Once the music ended, he would leave his office and begin his inspection rounds, checking each cell. This meant that while the music was playing, the prisoners could be certain that he was inside the office. They took advantage of this time. When the music started playing, Tim and Alex left their cells, then exited through the section door 3, went down the stairs, and reached door 4 on the lower level. They started testing their new key. As usual, the key didn't work at first, but Tim was ready. He had his metal file with him and immediately started adjusting the key. By now, he was an expert in this process, and everything was much easier than before, certainly not as difficult as trying to insert a key with a broomstick, like he had done for the cell door, which took 2 full months. On the first night they went down, Tim successfully adjusted the key and opened the lock. They quickly went back up the stairs, returned to their section in cells, and only minutes later the music stopped, signaling the start of the guard's inspection round. The night guard left his office and walked toward the cells. Now, they could open 4 out of 10 doors. But the further they progressed, the harder things became, because the doors were now farther and farther away from their cells. The next obstacle was door 5, which was right in front of the guard's office. How could they possibly reach the door and test their key when the guard's office was right next to it? Even if they tried, the risks were extremely high. If they were caught, their sentences would be doubled. They needed a way to test door 5 without the guard being inside his office. The only time the guard left his office was during his nightly inspection. He would exit the office, walk through the hallway, go upstairs, and reach their cells. But how could they leave their cells, reach door 5, and test their key without running into him halfway? The solution they found was a small storage cabinet under the staircase. It was big enough to fit 2 or 3 people. Since they knew the guard's routine, they could leave their cells while the music played, then hide inside the cabinet. Once the guard left his office, passed through door 4, and went upstairs toward their section, they would exit the cabinet, go to door 5, and test their key. They rehearsed the plan multiple times until they memorized every step. Then, they decided to go for it. It was the best plan they could come up with. The first step was making it look like they were still in their beds. They arranged blankets to make it seem like someone was sleeping underneath, so that when the guard checked their cells, he wouldn't suspect anything. As soon as the music started, that was their signal to move. Tim first had to unlock his cell's outer door. He pulled out the broomstick and started inserting the key into the lock. As usual, it was not an easy task. It took time and multiple attempts. After finally inserting the key, he unlocked the cell door and stepped out. He immediately went to Alex's cell, unlocked his door, and both of them left. They exited their section, door 3, went down the stairs, and hid inside the storage cabinet. They were extremely nervous. For the first time, they were outside their cells while a guard was patrolling nearby. Then, they encountered a problem they hadn't anticipated. Once inside the cabinet, they realized that there was no handle inside to close the door. The only thing they could grab was the tiny metal latch of the lock, which was as small as a coin. Alex was the one holding the cabinet door shut, but his hands were shaking uncontrollably. He had to grip the tiny latch with his fingertips, and on top of that, he was sweating and terrified. The situation was far from reassuring. The guard walked toward them. They heard him exit his office and head toward the staircase. Both of them were terrified. The guard reached door 4. They heard him take out his keys, insert one into the lock, and open the door. At that exact moment, as the guard stepped through the door, Alex lost his grip on the latch. His fingers slipped, probably due to sweat and nerves. The cabinet door suddenly swung open. The guard was right there. This was the worst possible scenario. Tim and Alex thought it was over. If they were caught, they were finished. But luck was on their side once again. The guard didn't notice them. He never even looked at the cabinet. His eyes were focused on the stairs. Without hesitating, he walked straight up and continued his patrol. Despite their panic, Tim and Alex knew they had no time to waste. As soon as they heard the guard reach their section, they jumped out of the cabinet and rushed toward door 4. To their luck, the guard had left the door open behind him. They didn't even need to use their key. It seemed like the guard had a habit of leaving doors open when heading upstairs, since he didn't expect any prisoners to be behind him. They passed through door 4, walked straight into the hallway, and headed for door 5. When they reached door 5, the first thing they did was test the previous keys. And luck was still on their side. The key for door 4 worked on door 5 as well. They passed through door 5, but then they encountered door 6, which was completely different. It was heavily reinforced and clearly much stronger than the previous ones. Tim immediately started testing the lock, while Alex kept watch through the gap in door 5, in case the guard returned. Meanwhile, the guard continued his routine patrol, checking each cell one by one. When he looked through Tim and Alex's windows, he would see the blankets, which still looked like someone was sleeping underneath. Their friend Stephen, who had stayed behind in his cell, was nervously watching the guard check the cells. At the same time, Tim and Alex were racing against time. They knew the guard took about 15 minutes to complete his inspection, so they had given themselves a 12-minute window to work. Tim continued working on door 6, trying different keys, but none of them worked. He kept experimenting with the lock while Alex stood guard, watching the time nervously. Tim tried various methods, including metal wires, but all his attempts failed. The situation became even harder because he was extremely nervous and his hands were shaking. When their 10-minute window was up, Alex urged him to stop. "We have to go back now, there's no more time." But Tim kept trying. "Wait, just a little more time." It got to the point where Alex had to physically pull him away and rush him back to the cabinet under the stairs. They hid just in time. Moments later, they heard the guard coming down the stairs. If they had stayed just a few seconds longer, they would have been caught. Finally, they took a deep breath as they watched the guard pass through door 4 and walk back to his office. Once the coast was clear, they emerged from the cabinet, climbed back up the stairs to the second floor, and returned to their cells. That night, Tim felt defeated. Even though they had successfully opened door 5, he had hoped to get past more doors in a single night. Since every trip outside their cells was extremely risky, the more trips they made, the higher their chances of getting caught. That night, Tim was so stressed that he couldn't sleep. He kept thinking about door 6, feeling that it was one of the hardest locks in the entire prison. He knew that he couldn't afford another failed attempt. He had to make absolutely sure that his next trip would be successful. He refused to risk another night of trial and error. He needed to get past all the doors in one attempt. During this time, Tim started making keys not just for the doors on their escape route, but for other doors in the prison. One of these was a hidden side door, which possibly led to the workshop. He even made a key for the workshop itself. The workshop had multiple entry points, so Tim created keys that would allow them to sneak in and take tools whenever needed. At this point, Tim had a whole collection of keys. He was practically a prison guard himself. But his main focus remained on door 6. He started brainstorming a completely new approach to create a more reliable key. His idea was to design an innovative key, a key made from metal wires but with a wooden head. The handle would be made of metal wires, making it flexible. This design had two major advantages. One, he could quickly switch between different wooden key heads, making it faster to test multiple shapes. 2, the flexible metal wires allowed him to move the key deeper into the lock, tilting it at different angles, something he couldn't do with rigid wooden keys. This meant that the wooden head of the key didn't need to be an exact match to the original key. The flexibility allowed for adjustments. When Tim finished this new design, he felt confident. He had finally created the perfect tool to open door 6. And he didn't just want to open door 6, he wanted to get through all the doors in one single night. But that meant they would need more time. Their friend Stephen, who stayed behind in the cell block, had to find a way to distract the guard so that his patrol took longer than usual. Finally, the night of execution arrived. As soon as the music started, they began their movements. Tim unlocked his cell, then Alex's cell, and they both left together. They went down the stairs and hid in the cabinet waiting. Once the music stopped, they heard the guard leaving his office, heading toward their section. As planned, they exited the cabinet, went through door 4, and proceeded to door 5, which they easily unlocked using the same key as before. Now it was time for door 6. Meanwhile, Stephen was back in the cell block, starting his distraction plan. He knew that the guard loved rugby, which was one of the most popular sports in South Africa. So he started talking to the guard about the latest matches, who won, who lost, and how the games went. Since the guard loved rugby, he kept talking, engaged in the conversation. While this was happening, Tim worked on door 6. He had 3 different wooden heads for his metal wire key, and he tested them one by one. Thanks to the flexible wires, he was able to manipulate the key more freely inside the lock. He twisted the key left, right, up and down, trying every possible movement. Finally, he heard the click, the lock opened. His excitement immediately returned. He and Alex quickly stepped through door 6. In front of them was door 7. This door was a barred gate and its lock was clearly visible. As soon as Tim saw the lock, he knew it would be easy. The screws were on the outside. One of the tools he had was a small prison-issued knife used for cutting bread. The prison allowed them to keep these small, dull knives in their cells. Tim used the knife to unscrew the lock, and it came off quickly. He then damaged the internal mechanism, making the lock easy to open with a simple wire. Then, he put the lock back in place, so it looked normal. Now, door 7 could be opened easily at any time. They moved to door 8, and to their luck, it was already open. They proceeded to door 9, which had a lock similar to previous ones. Tim immediately tested his keys. Once again, luck was on their side. The key that opened door 4 and door 5 also worked on door 9. Back at the cell block, Stephen was still distracting the guard. When the rugby conversation ended, he kept talking, discussing the guard's personal life and family. But Stephen knew he couldn't keep the guard occupied forever. Tim and Alex had to finish their mission quickly. They finally reached door 10. This was the final door. By now, they knew that time was running out and they needed to return. Door 10 was different. It was a simple wooden door like the door to an apartment. It was the only thing standing between them and freedom. Unlike the previous locks, this one looked completely different. They didn't have time to test keys, so they decided to leave it and return later. They rushed back toward the stairs and hid in the cabinet again, waiting for the guard to come down. Sure enough, within a minute or two, the guard returned. As soon as he walked past them, they quickly exited the cabinet, climbed the stairs, and returned to their cells. That night was a major success. They had opened every single door except for the last one. The next day, the 3 of them met in the prison yard as usual to discuss their next step. They felt that the time had come to escape. Even though they hadn't opened door 10 yet, their accumulated experience gave them confidence that they would find a way to unlock it. However, this time, Stephen would be joining them, which meant he wouldn't be in his cell to distract the guard and delay him. This was a problem because they needed to delay the guard for as long as possible. This was the night they were actually escaping. As mentioned before, their entire prison section was filled with political prisoners, meaning everyone shared the same ideology and supported each other. Even though the other prisoners weren't escaping with them, they were ready to help in any way possible. Keep in mind, this kind of solidarity is almost impossible in a normal prison. In most cases, other prisoners wouldn't cooperate unless they shared the same beliefs and charges. Man considered the leader of the political prisoners in their section was named Dennis Goldberg. Dennis told them that he would help by distracting the guard. The plan they came up with was to cut off the electricity in their section. The electrical breaker was located on the staircase they had to pass after exiting their section. If they cut the power, Dennis could call the guard and ask him to fix it. This would keep the guard occupied. Finally, the big night arrived, December 11, 1979. The 3 of them were filled with excitement, but at the same time, they were extremely nervous. They tried to calm themselves and stay focused. The first step was to change their clothes. They wore civilian clothes that they had stolen from one of the prison buildings. As mentioned before, they had made keys for various doors beyond the 10 doors in their escape route. With these keys, they had stolen tools and clothing. Wearing civilian clothes was a crucial part of the plan. If they escaped in prison uniforms, they would immediately be noticed by guards or even people outside. They sat in their civilian outfits, waiting for the music to start. As soon as the music played, they moved. Tim unlocked his cell door, both the inner door and the outer door with the broomstick key. Then, he immediately freed Stephen and Alex from their cells. Dennis watched them from his cell window and confirmed that he would call the guard as soon as they cut the electricity. The 3 of them exited their section. As planned, Alex opened the electrical breaker while they were going down the stairs. He messed with the wires, deliberately tangling them to make the repair more difficult. Then, they quickly hid in the cabinet under the stairs. For the first time, all 3 of them were hiding inside. The cabinet was small, and they barely fit. Meanwhile, in the cell block, Denny's began yelling for the guard. He shouted that the electricity had gone out. Moments later, the 3 prisoners in the cabinet heard footsteps approaching. The guard walked down the hallway slowly, taking his time. They were at the peak of their anxiety, afraid that the cabinet doors might pop open, like what had happened last time. But the guard walked past them, went upstairs to the cells, and didn't see them. As soon as he was out of sight, the 3 of them exited the cabinet, passed through door 4, and headed toward door 5. Meanwhile, the guard reached the cell block, saw the lights off, and went to Denny's, who was waiting for him. Denny's pretended to be confused, saying that the power suddenly went out. But instead of letting the guard go fix the issue immediately, Denny's kept talking, stalling him. During this time, Tim, Steven, and Alex reached door 5, which they easily unlocked using the key from door 4. Then they faced door 6, the most difficult lock. Fortunately, they had the wire key ready, and within 2 to 3 minutes they unlocked it. Next was door 7, the barred gate, which Tim had already sabotaged. It could be opened easily with any tool. Then door 8, which was already open. Then door 9, which they unlocked with the same key as door 4 and 5. They climbed the small staircase leading to door 10. Tim immediately began testing his keys, but none of them worked. He tried one key after another, but the lock refused to open. This was their worst nightmare. Tim had become so skilled at opening locks that he never expected to fail at the final door. Meanwhile, the guard finished talking to Denny's and started heading toward the breaker to fix the power. When he reached the electrical panel, he began fixing the wires. Tim and the others kept struggling with the lock for more than 20 minutes, but nothing worked. By the time the guard restored the electricity, he was finishing his patrol and heading back to his office. The 3 prisoners could hear his footsteps approaching. They knew that the guard was now between them and their cells. If they wanted to return, they would have to pass right in front of his office. Tim suggested going back to their cells and trying again another night. Yes, it was risky to pass by the guard's office, but it was the safest option. However, Steven and Alex disagreed. They insisted that this was their only chance. There was no going back. Alex grabbed a metal tool they had stolen from the workshop and decided to force the lock open. Tim objected immediately. "Breaking the lock will make too much noise. The guard will hear us." But Alex had already made up his mind. He started chipping away at the wooden door around the lock. The door was wooden, not reinforced metal, like door 6. The loud noise of the chipping and scraping was nerve-wracking. Tim stood watching the hallway, terrified that the guard might come out at any moment. Alex kept carving and breaking the wood until suddenly the door opened. It seemed that the guard hadn't heard them. Their happiness was beyond words, but they remained calm. They knew they were still inside the prison's perimeter. They quietly opened the door, stepped outside, and walked normally. They kept their heads down, trying not to attract attention. Not far from them, they saw a car with 2 prison guards standing next to it. It looked like they had just finished their shift and were about to go home. Their hearts pounded violently, but they remained calm. The guards glanced at them once or twice but didn't seem suspicious. After all, they were wearing civilian clothes, and no prisoner was expected to be in that area. The 3 of them kept walking until they reached one of the city's main streets. Finally, they could breathe freely. They felt overwhelming joy. Their escape plan had succeeded. This is usually the point in prison escape stories where the prisoners get caught, but not this time. For the first time, we have a prison escape story where the prisoners weren't captured. The 3 of them had coordinated with a smuggler from Zimbabwe, South Africa's neighboring country. This smuggler helped them escape to Zimbabwe. From there, they traveled to Zambia, then to Tanzania, and finally flew to London. They remained in London until apartheid ended in 1994. Tim later wrote a book titled Escape from Pretoria, which detailed their entire escape story. The book was even turned into a movie. Tim also appeared in documentaries, lectures, and conferences worldwide to share their incredible escape. And that's the end of the story. If you enjoyed it, don't forget to like and subscribe, and I'll see you in the next video. Goodbye.